Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our virtual Enlightenment Salon of October 16th, 2022. I am pleased to be joined today by two of our U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, Jason Geringer, our legislative director, and Art Ramon Garcia, our director of visual art. And joining me today in person is our guest of honor, Jason Mallory. Jason Mallory was an independent congressional candidate in California. He's also the author of this book, Proxy, When Robots Work Better. It's a novel that he wrote in 2012. And today he is joining us to discuss a variety of ideas, some of the topics that Proxy addresses, as well as his idea for an innovative medical startup, as well as his thoughts on politics, the importance of independent candidates, and the state of freedom in America, and how we might be able to have a beneficial effect on that. So, Jason, welcome. Please tell us briefly about yourself and about your book, Proxy.
All right. Well, my name is Jason Mallory. I'm a fourth-generation teacher from Silicon Valley, native Californian, and I've been living in Sacramento the last close to a decade, and I've taught roughly 10,000 students there, where I've worked as a guest teacher and given people the ability to download this book for free, also in HTML format via Smashwords. So you can then use Google Translate and download Proxy in English, Google Translate as the HTML page of the web page, and then have like a Magna Carta for all these different languages. You could have Proxy, When Robots Work Better, teach you all these different languages on the same screen. So that's one of the things I've been doing in Sacramento. I've been nominated for Congress twice. I've lost in the primaries and the pre-districting of CD4 against Tom McClintock. I was not able to compete there, but I was nominated. And I've also been nominated and on the ballot in 2020 versus Zoe Lofgren. She's got almost 3 decades of incumbency after working for the prior incumbent, and had no replies to me when addressing the issue of how to adapt free world economies from primarily human labor to primarily automated labor. So without any ability to have correspondence or representation from what's been called the capital of Silicon Valley, I put myself on the ballot. From the concept in this book, which I've illustrated in the science fiction novel, is a policy of how to make that adaptation and to still have a form of democracy, what I'm calling a democracy 2.0, where we would be able to vote on the usage of automated labor, what it does, what it doesn't do, as well as be able to get a fair share so we could still have a supply and demand balance and the freedoms that capitalism can provide. I put that together in policy. You can check out mallory2020.com for exact wording and in-depth discussion on it as well. And a couple other basic solutions, such as on the southern border, rather than having a wall that we fight over, I suggested a hyperloop connecting the Gulf of Mexico to San Diego, where we could send a shipping container with a vacuum tube. So like if you put a leaf blower on a ABS pipe or something, like a sewer pipe, and you blow air through it, you can put a tennis ball in there and it'll run around real fast. So we could actually break the sound barrier. We can go 600 miles an hour without a sonic boom with a shipping container on wheels with a parachute being blown through a tube that's going, one way and then one way back. And we could do this at zero emissions and have same day coast to coast delivery for the United States. And at the same time as removing the domestic footprint for the domestic carbon footprint for transporting those containers, we'd be removing a gigantic carbon footprint for all the shipping containers that go down to the Panama Canal or around the Horn of South America and come back up. We'd be 2 to 3 weeks faster, remove a huge carbon footprint, and be able to pay for it with a shipping tool similar to the Panama Canal. These were not able to get responses from the party that is 70 to 75% control for 3 districts in the area. So that's just what happened there. What seemed to be occurring instead is what I'm just going to call the modern slave trade of the US southern border, which I believe is going to end up becoming the exportation of our currency into other nations as people end up being expelled, but having a bank account or something. So I think that's what's occurring instead, but it's not following safe country protocols or making the life for American citizens safer or better, in my opinion. But anyway, these are things that I've kind of proposed, as well as a health facts app, and the ability to have AI diagnostic tools, so you can have a transparency on what procedures exist, what procedures are likely to have a good benefit for you, and what they cost and how to accomplish those things. There are independent for-profit businesses that are doing this. I was proposing this as something that could actually, be not a someone starting a business with a server at their home or something and having that be the level of security on HIPAA and people's medical records, but the ability to have this be something that, for example, organizations like Kaiser Hospitals, which is the second largest employer in the state of California, they're refusing to use AI diagnostic tools, refusing to comment on such, and I've sent them links and they don't want to. So rather than a forced ignorance, if we could have the ability to have transparency on our own health and operate under the right to try laws and things like that, I think that would be more advantageous for the health of American citizens. So that's what I proposed with Health Facts app. There's a lot of pushback while putting the paperwork together. My heart started to hurt. I went from being able to do 50 push-ups to not being able to do a single one while initiating the originating document for Health Facts app. I was under pressure in the process of doing that. And that might just be because it would affect 1 out of $5 that are spent in America being on medical or healthcare, and the correlative pressures from such a change. So yeah, those are the things, those 3 topics anyway, I put onto the 2020 ballot. I got the exact same number of votes as the year I wrote my book, Proxy. So 2012 votes? 2011. But yeah, it was, I got the prints in 2012. I got them printed in Seoul, Korea. And yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Yes, indeed. So we have a few questions and observations from our viewers. Mike Lazine wonders who is working on the Hyperloop. And the Hyperloop is a concept that was originated, at least in recent times, by Elon Musk. But Elon Musk does not have the resources directly to work on the Hyperloop because he's involved with SpaceX, Tesla, his tunnel projects, his solar projects. So he essentially opened up this idea to any companies who wish to experiment with Hyperloop systems and make a contribution. There is a nice Wikipedia entry on the Hyperloop, and there are some examples listed there. So Technical University of Munich Hyperloop set the Hyperloop speed record of 463 kilometers per hour or 288 miles per hour in July 2019 at the pod design competition hosted by SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. Virgin Hyperloop, that's Richard Branson's company, conducted the first human trial in November 2020 at its test site in Las Vegas, in the state of Nevada, reaching a top speed of 172 kilometers per hour or 107 miles per hour. So there are real world entities that have set up test hyperloops and even have launched human passengers in the hyperloops. And the idea of a hyperloop route along the US-Mexican border is definitely not outside the realm of possibility. I would say, in response to Jason Geringer's observation, the US immigration problem is extremely complicated. I would agree with that. Now, I do think it would be better if the current border wall were replaced by a hyperloop that would be more usable instead of just being a barrier to keep people out. It could be a transportation artery. And I think it would be quite beneficial for the shipment of goods. We have serious supply chain issues in the United States right now, and transportation issues are a part of that because it is quite difficult to recruit and retain competent truck drivers. Indeed, trucking companies have resorted to various methods, including hiring very young, inexperienced truck drivers, offering them minimal training, and they still can't fill all of the positions, even though the pay is fairly good. So why is that? Well, trucking is a demanding job. It's a dangerous job. Truckers drive for long hours. Recent federal guidelines have restricted how long they're able to operate their vehicles, but still, they drive sometimes in excess of 12 hours per day. And I would imagine as time advances, fewer and fewer people are going to want these jobs. We're going to need some alternative transportation methods to get goods across the country. So I think this is definitely an innovative idea. I like any sort of application of technology to medicine, including applications for the sharing of data, for the use of AI in personalized medicine approaches. So that is quite promising. I am interested in hearing more about the democracy 2.0 concept that you articulated. How would that work?
Okay, so essentially what you can see on Mallory 2020 and what has been changed from one word of equal to fair, from the science fiction to the actual policy proposed as to be a bill in the law creating position of Congress, is that every citizen would have the right to one equal share of the automated labor force, meaning an equal vote for what it does or does not perform, and a fair share of what it produces as a whole. So what that would do would enable some way of being able to determine how automated labor is used. So similar to like a robot income tax, or the ability to set labor rates, or the ability to have a direct control, how that comes about is kind of like saying election. And then you say, well, is it ranked choice? Is it top two? There are a lot of different ways it could be implemented. And to be able to do that in a reasonable way, this would be a right to have that human control of human society. And what that would do is, when it's not just, one robot replacing one person or something like that, if you have 10 robots per person, because we're no longer stuck to the number of people being the labor force, as we're replacing human labor force as the predominant labor force for automated labor, humans can still have a control of saying, for example, I would like my representative labor force to be doing these things and not doing these things. So in the process of doing that, you're able to set a labor rate for a rental cost for automated labor. So rather than having proprietary ownership of all automated labor and having the labor force or Labor Party of the UK or the Democratic Party of the United States, what that's the mirroring of that, rather than deplatforming the check and balance of owner and labor that has been the two-party systems for the industrialized world, we're still able to have that check and balance in a patch where humanity is able to be that moral filtration, because a robot can't be a moral filtration of itself. Humans are able to say, we want these things and not these things through some form of a vote. And therefore, we as humanity have a control of our own destiny, as opposed to whomever is in control of a labor force having the subversion of economy, the subversion of authoritarian rule, essentially, because you can't say we're on strike, they're robots. We're not gonna do that. That's immoral. They can't make that determination as a labor force if they're not able to be controlled by humans. So yeah, the ability to have, you break it down to, there's an hourly rate for a form of automated labor, and you're able to utilize automated labor in a distributed way that way. You don't have to have the fixed costs of being able to compete with, big business as a small business if you're able to access the means of production, the tools of automated labor. So if there's an hourly rate there, we're able to have a post-automation middle class, because a small business would be able to use the tools to help them compete. And from that hourly rate, you could have a portion of that go to the fair distribution of what's produced. So from that hourly rate, you could set that at a higher or lower hourly rate based on a vote for what labor is chosen to be used for or not. So if you're able to affect the labor rate for, if people didn't want to go work for a tobacco company, for example, they have to pay more for finding the employee. Whereas if you were to work for a nonprofit doing something for the environment, you might not have to pay as much, because people would rather do something that is producing something they want to have happen. Mm-hmm. So if we're able to make votes like that and help set labor rates, then from that hourly rate, we're able to passively guide humanity by making some roads tougher and some roads easier, to be able to get the results that humanity wants, which we're able to do as humans, but we're being supplanted with automation. So that's that same vote, kind of like how your ballot is a vote, your dollar is a vote, your labor is a vote, but now it's not anymore. So to reclaim that, so that humanity is not supplanted in its own direction and destiny with whomever controls automated labor, that's not necessarily the best way of doing it, and it's certainly not upholding the principles of the United States of America if it's operating here. So I'm not against automated labor. I'm for it. I'm for the usage. I'm for having 10 robots per person doing things on behalf of humanity, not on behalf of an individual at the expense of humanity. So how we evolve our labor force is a big deal. So having some level of control from a voting populace, by having every citizen have the right to one equal share of the automated labor force, meaning an equal vote for what it does or does not perform, and receiving a fair share of what's produced, that as a right, as in a constitutional right, an amendment to the US Constitution, as opposed to myriad regulation that's just going to filter people, tie things down, make it harder to be able to do anything. If instead we're making through that the ability to have an hourly rate on automated labor, and for small business to then be able to access those means of production, then we're able to create a middle class post-automation. We're able to have many businesses taking on the same problem in various ways, and thus our technology growth rate is faster. This is why capitalism beat communism, because we were able to address a problem with many, many businesses doing it in different ways and figuring out what's going to win in the market, as opposed to, the Soviet Union or something saying, well, we're going to address this problem. Here's how we do it. And it's one organization doing one solution, kind of. So if you're wrong, or if basically that system does not have the technology growth rate, it's a lesser technology growth rate as compared to the competition of capitalism and many organizations competing. So being able to maintain those types of things rather than you can only shop at Amazon, right? If there's the ability to have alternative productions of things, you can have new products that Amazon never created or thought of, or what have you. So I think it'd be better. Plus, it would enable, what's made our country great, which is a strong middle class, the ability to have home ownership and self-reliance. Freedom begins at self-reliance, or you're in a breadline still of some type. So being able to maintain that when humanity is primarily obsolete in the labor force, that's a check and balance that we need to correct. Automation has been a basically deplatformed issue for about a decade in my experience. The only other politician to bring it up has been Andrew Yang. I threw him his first 3 events in Sacramento. I'd love to have a round table with him at some point. He has not been able to comment in regard to what I love his wording and marketing of freedom dividend for UBI, or universal basic income. He's not been able to comment with me to date regarding the sustainability of that, effects on inflation, or if having a robot income tax through an hourly rate on automated labor through what I'm proposing in this democracy 2.0 kind of system, which would have basically a sustainable income from the taxation of the robot income tax, rather than just saying everyone gets $1,000 a month without having any, market balance to that. So one of the things that what I'm proposing would make it so, like, if automated labor, this robot, it's $10 per hour. Well, if there's an income tax on it because the humans aren't paying the income taxes anymore, they've been removed from the labor force through competition. So the government's not getting that tax. They're going to come after people at some point for the ability to function the government, or come after companies, or come after some way of maintaining the government's function. So if we do that in a way where there's still an income tax from the labor that's being performed, and if that $10 an hour robot is now paying, let's say, $2 per hour in taxes, if $1 is able to be the taxes to the government, and $1 is able to be the funding mechanism for a UBI-like social service for a displaced worker, humanity's ability to feed themselves, right? So now you want that automated labor. So the problem of being a Luddite, or the problem of slowing down the progress of the effectiveness of our labor force, or slowing down the progress of what our labor force is able to produce, and the ability to keep the US on the forefront of technology and be the free world spreading leader of the world that it is, as opposed to others. In order to do that, we got to keep our labor force at the top. So now there's, rather than saying that robot's going to steal my job, don't do that. Now it's, oh, well, I'm able to get $1 per hour, 24 hours a day from this robot doing work. Let's make 2 robots do it. Let's make 5, 10 robots and apply, build the dreams of people, right? And now there's not one robot for $10 an hour putting in that dollar. There's 5 of them doing $5 total, right? So there's an incentive to grow and utilize a labor force rather than the incentive to spend human life on tasks that are without the deeper meaning that we could have as people, where we can make friends of each other instead of tools of each other, where we can, expand our horizons as opposed to chase a dollar to be able to afford to be in the location to earn the dollar, for example. So I think it's an evolution for people. It'd be an evolution of our society. We'd be able to have more valuable lives, a deeper experience, to be able to be self-motivated and actually fulfill those motivations as opposed to just dream. These types of invisible bars of finances can be broken through a system like this, and without having the barriers of, I'm going to be replaced by a robot, so I'm against that. No, replace me with 5 robots so I make more money and can use more tools. So yeah, I think we could build a better society. I think that's the evolution that we have the opportunity to do through the structure of technology, labor, and economics, and the ability to vote upon what it's doing or not doing.
It's an interesting concept to supply what is essentially a basic income to people through the productivity of automation by somehow allocating that productivity to pay individuals. Now, I do have a few questions to try to understand the concept a bit more. So a lot of automated production is highly heterogeneous. So it's not that there is a single pool of robots that can be devoted to any task that people want. So for instance, some robots on the assembly line to produce a car are very specialized in performing particular functions. Like this robot puts in this bolt in this place in this very specific way. It's programmed to do that. And you can't make it create phones, for instance, or buttons. Different robots might be able to create those. So my question is, how do you set up the parameters of the vote, especially given that there are millions of different goods to be produced and potentially many thousands of different kinds of robots, each of which are capable of doing different things? So at what level would the democratic aspect of this function that people get to decide, oh, we're going to deploy these robots for these particular purposes? And of course, it has to be technically feasible. These robots have to have the ability to actually achieve that kind of production. So how do you structure that so that people would have a meaningful choice?
So something like what the DMV is for automobiles, where you're registering for existence and use, on a very small scale, if you're asking your phone for a map rather than paying a person who drew a map for the map, that scale, no. For like a ranch that you live on and you're producing your own food, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is for bigger business, general things, where you'd have a DMV for robots. So the ability to register for existence and use, what is it? Is it a single use robot that goes like this and that's all it does? For sure. Which is very different than what Elon Musk is proposing with AI Day just occurred, and this robot that I can still dance way better than is going to be able to flip a burger way better than me, though. So as that and the scaled production of such things becomes much more the reality, the application of things is where we're looking at, I think, because if you're doing something on a wide scale, not like for a personal use or something like that, then it's like, yeah, what is that labor? And similar to having like a tax brackets, what kind of automated labor is it? So something like what the DMV is for cars, what's street legal, right? You can't have the Terminator be, your mall security. Might be overkill. You know what I mean? So the same as you don't necessarily give a 16-year-old who just got their license the ability to drive an 18-wheeler semi-truck, the ability to have that kind of segregation to what automated labor is and how it can be appropriately attributed with an hourly rate, and how that can be accessed by the average person to be able to create a competitive business post automation of the labor force, and how we can maintain a middle class from that. That it is a gray area. I'm dealing with Sacramento calling my Ford F-250 truck, that's a commercial weight vehicle. Oh, so you want more money? Those types of things. So how that gray area occurs is hopefully not based just in the necessity of functioning a government or something like that from revenues, but based in hopefully what's fair and how humanity through a vote can set labor rates rather than any. And I believe there'd be an auditing system involved in what an hourly rate for a type of automated labor is, so that we're not having someone in a back room setting the labor rate, but humanity would be through being able to direct our own society in a voting system. But yeah, it is a gray area as far as how you break down the difference between an artificial general intelligence that doesn't even embody into any single device whatsoever. How is that hour of labor relative to a mechanical arm that picks up a piece of steel and puts it on another piece of steel? And what are those worth? How do you break that down? That is a gray area, although it can be done in some way. And I think as these technologies develop, we'll be able to refine that way, the way we've been able to refine tax brackets, or like what's the difference between, a retail firearm versus a nuclear bomb, or whatever other kind of thing you want to, put in the dip in between those, or like what's a retail vehicle that you can get a license to drive versus that is an 18-wheeler you need a bigger license for, or that's a tank and you're not allowed to take it on the freeway. Mm-hmm. Those types of decisions, it's going to come down to judgment. And instead of having just, a few people or a few organizations that own the labor force and therefore have a massive influence on what those decisions are, I think it'd be better to have a democracy 2.0 and have some correlation to humanity's choice on what we'd like to do in this world and how we'd like to live, as opposed to being subject to whomever owns the labor force.
So do you think then the primary function of the democratic aspect will not be so much to decide what robots get created or what they produce, but rather the labor rate to attribute to each particular robot for the type of income distribution that then occurs based on the operation of that robot? So if people say, well, the labor rate for this robot is $50 per hour and the tax, for lack of a better term, is 10% of that, then whoever benefits from that robot gets $5 per hour. I'm also curious about essentially which robots get subject to this system, because, of course, robots have been used in production for a long time, sometimes for multiple decades. And the kind of automation that you're describing is, I think, of a more advanced nature than what we've seen, say, in the mid-20th century. So where do you draw the line between the robots that are sufficiently well established, integrated into the economy, that they haven't been displacing human labor for a long time because those positions have not existed for decades for human laborers, versus the robots that you think are going to pose a more significant possibility of doing that, and where you think there would be a large displaced former labor force who would need to be compensated?
I think the tractor replacing 19 out of 20 farmers and the book The Grapes of Wrath is a great example of what I'm talking about. It has more to do with the scale of effect on people than if you create a single use thing. So it's more basically to if you're going to have a major impact, you're going to deal with the pushback of a major impact, because it's not affecting people. So in regard to like being able to make those determinations on what is, a robot that replaces people or not, I'm not trying to slow that down in any way. I'm trying to help that be able to be responsibly adapted into our economy, as opposed to doing so in a revolution that is geared not towards the empowerment of individual rights. So how we maintain that and how we have some form of vote in it, I think, is going to be able to be the platform for the conversation, so that individual rights are not completely superseded from economic scarcity or from in line with authoritarianism, or there isn't the ability to have a voice or effect. So, I mean, what we've seen, like in coming out of the Dust Bowl, which was created from the overuse of technology and the overtilling of farming and getting rid of the widespread root plants to farm it in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and what we got the Okies from in California. The government solution was to give fraudulent flyers to go pick fruit in California, and we had economic refugees traveling the country from the tractor replacing 19 out of 20 farmers. So something on that kind of a scale, you need to figure something out. And what we got out of that, coming out of the Great Depression with FDR, was social services, where the slogan was pay one man to dig a hole and pay another man to fill it in. To me, I'd like a more in-depth life than digging a hole.
Right. That's wasteful to just have labor for the sake of labor without the material output that improves human life.
Yeah, so to be able to have that kind of freedom that can actually coexist within a capitalist society where freedom is dependent on your amount of money, then, how do we do that? How do we maintain checks and balances of supply and demand when people can't demand things based on their own leverage in the economy as a labor force, but we can supply vast amounts of things. So how we maintain that supply and demand system, if you create a single robot that's going to comb my hair and that's all, then you don't have a really big economic impact. But if you're white, and thus we wouldn't need to have any kind of like, what's the hourly rate on your automated comb?
Right.
I don't know.
So if you have a personal service robot that just does work around the house for you, maybe it's a 3D printing robot so it can create some trinkets for you, that would be exempt from the labor tax.
Yeah, I think personal use is a very different thing than scaling something that would, for example, replace 19 out of 20 farmers with a tractor. That wasn't even a robot. It was just a machine, but it automated away human labor. And at the time, we had the ability to absorb that into, the car companies were coming to be, Motown and Detroit were booming because, let's make cars, right? This is a new thing. So now, rather than slowly implementing a tractor, now we're dealing with digital technologies that are able to communicate globally, and it's not, the robot can drive your tractor and be your secretary and whatever else. So it's something that's developing much faster. It's something that has much more wide use, and it's something that's displacing people at a rate that government doesn't really have the ability to respond to in a way that's going to be a timely effect. So with that, it's like those gears, the regulatory gears and such, are moving at a slower pace than the advancement of the technologies. So how do you do that if the effect's already there and you're playing catch up? That's kind of selling out the whole point of having leadership. So what I'm proposing is that we'd be able to have a platform for how those wide scale automated systems are affecting the world and affecting the lives of all these people, rather than just making us obsolete and then who didn't get the vaccine and died.
I'm curious how you would respond to this observation by Daniel Tweet, who writes, "It seems like a black market of robots would rapidly develop. So if some robots could escape taxation by being essentially invisible to the authorities, if there could be like black market enterprises that would use robots but would hide the robots and just smuggle the goods that the robots produce onto the market, maybe a kind of gray market where people aren't quite sure where the goods are coming from, but they seem reasonably priced, so people buy them."
Yeah, I mean, there are black markets that exist all over the place. I think the modern day slave trade is an example of that, that's far less moral than if someone's illegally using a robot or driving an unregistered vehicle, those types of things. But yeah, I see how the idea is to help people be able to compete with the means of production in a distributed fashion, rather than saying, in order for you to be able to be competitive, you have to use a black market. So how we balance those, so we have the ability to turn interest rates up or down, right? And we've got a knob for the economy to twist an effect. So if we have that for the demand side, for can you use your credit card? It's 50% interest. No, you're not going to. It's 5% interest. Oh, sure. So being able to twist that knob for the demand side, if we're able to twist another knob for the supply side, saying labor rates are like this, your ability to produce is like this, then we're able to control a thing where we're able to find a happier medium. So the goal is to not have to need a black market tools to be able to compete in our economy. But yes, I agree. People are going to, until they're forced to pay a tax on it, they're not going to pay the tax on it. Yeah, I think that a black market for production is going to exist. That's, of course, the same as there's people in sweatshops. I just think it's better to have robots in sweatshops than human beings.
Oh, of course. I think certain types of labor are inherently arduous, dangerous, prone to causing long-term physical harm to the workers. And I think the sooner we can automate away that kind of labor, the sooner we can liberate human beings to perform tasks that are not just more productive, but they're more fulfilling, they're more conducive to their longevity. Of course, the reason why we're having this discussion is the transition could be painful for some people who are displaced as a result of automation in a variety of fields. It could be in physical production, but it could also be in a more intellectual field, really any field that requires repeated high throughput types of tasks, including, say, data processing, could be automated and has been automated in certain situations. Fields that require more variability and more deployment of higher order thinking and judgment are less prone to automation. So if you work on custom tailored projects where each project is different and you have a variety of different clients or a variety of different situations that you face if you're running a large enterprise and you have to deal with tens of different dilemmas, each of which requires a different skill set. That is a lot more difficult to automate than if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, whether that be physical or mental. With that being said, it does seem to me that, as you acknowledged, a black market problem would exist. Also, a kind of allocation problem would exist in that whom do you require to pay this tax? My suggestion would be, if something like this is implemented, to do it incrementally, where if a business is planning to lay off human workers, and you could set up a threshold like a company above a certain size or above a certain revenue threshold so that you don't encompass the small businesses, then
the progression of it, though, sorry to interrupt,
right.
is more so a smaller human requirement business supplanting a business with that higher labor cost. So kind of like how the .com era replaced the brick and mortar era because of the costs of doing business. And now you have the Kiva robotic warehousing system instead of Borders Books.
Right. Right.
It's not that it's that Borders Books needed to change what they were doing as much. It's the next generation of things that can, that's survival of the financial fittest.
Right. So it is possible that a business might choose not to automate, but then it would be outcompeted by those who choose to automate. And I understand that. So the question is, can we identify the people who are displaced by automation, and to kind of cushion the blow, assign them a certain fraction of the output from a particular robot that could somehow be linked to their displacement? So people who worked at Borders Books or Blockbuster Video could receive some share from the robots that work at Amazon. Would that perhaps be a better use for the DMV style classification system that you're advocating, to try to figure out, okay, who is actually being impacted by this transition, and how do we make sure that they have the resources to not become destitute, to retrain, to find another niche, another role within the labor force?
So like who qualifies for Social Security in the US to be able to get a Social Security check? That kind of a system is what you're saying. But then you have, well, what if you get pregnant before you're eligible for Social Security? Now, what's up with that person and what's up with their child? So a generation later, how are you still doing that? So that's why the only other answer that's been put forward on this has been a universal basic income. And like the moral foundation behind a slogan like Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter, there's a obvious moral foundation behind it, that human life has value.
Yes.
And it's not just the usage of a tool of a human that determines that value, although that is a factor. So what's a displaced worker? Well, how many teachers haven't gone back to work since COVID shut down schools and things? How many, how many people have been, so not talking about like minimum wage jobs, but surgeons are, in my experience, I've been on the table having discussions with replacing this. It takes 10 years, you go $500,000 into debt, and then you can get the job to be a surgeon after PhD, residency, and all this other stuff, and all of these student loans, and now you're in the whole $500,000, and the Da Vinci robotic surgeon is better than a human hand at it. So what are you going to do, right? That's a pretty obvious situation there, but it's not like that person's going to get a welfare check that's going to cost, or that's going to cover a $500,000 thing. So it's not a one size fits all situation.
That's the tragedy of the American education system, with its horrendous levels of student debt, that People,
Yeah.
especially going to medical school or law school, sometimes graduate school as well, are expected to take on without really a rational basis for expecting a sufficient return. And I think that creates a broken system. Now, I wanted to give the option to Jason Geringer to ask some questions or make some observations, because he has a comment saying that the personal robot idea is very similar to the digital proxies described by the engineers at AGI Laboratory. So, Jason, could you elaborate on that and make any other observations you wish?
First of all, I'd just like to say, from everything that I've learned about artificial intelligence, and Jason is correct that this is coming. Not only will AI be doing all of the menial jobs, but they will be able to take all of our cognitive jobs too. So they'll be able to be doctors and lawyers, and that's like 60% of the workforce. And like he said, the government ain't going to be able to. It's too big. We have to start thinking about it now. That's why we got in Omni Futurist group started up by Mike DeVerde, which is taking a deep dive and looking into the economic singularity and trying to figure out, what is the best path through that. I'm sure you'd probably find that group very fascinating. It's on the Transhuman Club. It's one of the groups there. And so there's that, if anybody wants to check that out. And yeah, the other thing you said about where, because once there's things the cost is gonna go to zero. If you got all these robots, then the labor cost goes, well, maybe not to zero, but way down. So it would be handy if, like you said, if you had your own robot, and then your own robot could go to work and get paid for you. That makes me think that the employers are probably just gonna not hire your robot and just hire their own, and then so I'm wondering that maybe might need some legislation or some kind of something. But I think that's a good idea, because it incentivizes things. I mean, you don't lose out. You still get everything you need, and you're not bummed out because the robots are taking all your jobs because one's paying you. But whether that's going to work or not, and there's all kinds of awesome tools coming out recently that I hope you guys all look for. They're e-governance, and just the same exact stuff that Jason was talking about. There's a Sway platform, which is an ideation tool. It helps groups of people to talk about stuff and figure out what is the best idea. And then I recently found, just yesterday, Mike Sin from CureDAO showed it to me. It's called the Idea Market, and it basically kind of does the same thing as what Sway does. It's an ideation tool, but it also has built-in blockchain contracts to where, like, if we were having a discussion on, I don't know, whatever, immigration or whatever, and you provide a statement that, and then back it up with a source, and that provides and it's voted on by other people that says that yes, this was good. You get a percentage of the stake, because you stake like a pool of tokens on that problem or that conversation. So it's like, if I want to have a conversation about, I don't know, immigration, say, you can stake an amount of stuff on there, and then people get incentivized to come and figure this out. I thought that was a brilliant idea. The only problem that I've been noticing actually is that even though when there's monetary incentive, people still get lazy. So I'm actually thinking that we're probably going to need a little more than only monetary incentives, but work in gamification and, get the beeps and the, yay, you completed this, and, gamify it. Because even though, in some of these DAOs, I'm in a lot of DAOs, and even though doing some of this stuff is actually, would make something, I still get bored.
Well,
So
the
go ahead, man. Jump in whenever.
The incentive issue is an interesting one because it depends on what we're trying to achieve. So one goal would be to provide a universal basic income, or at least an income cushion for people who are displaced due to economic or technological transitions. Another incentive set would try to enable people to be active contributors and not just benefit from the productivity of robots, but actually contribute something themselves in terms of their minds, their creativity. And my outlook on this is there are going to be plenty of roles for human creativity. They may not be conventional job type roles that exist today. There may be new jobs that are created, new professions that are created that somehow synergize with robots. And certainly a lot of old jobs are going to be made obsolete. But as Jason Mallory pointed out, this has happened previously throughout history with mechanization, and it didn't even have to be automation. A tractor still has a human driver, but the occupation of tractor driver didn't exist in the 19th century. But a lot of the manual farm laborers were no longer necessary when tractor drivers came into the picture. Nonetheless, humans from that era were able to find a lot of other jobs. And I'm thinking this is likely to be a pattern that continues. But on the other hand, if you want to reward people based on the productivity of automation, that's a set of incentives to consider, like how do you allocate robots to individuals? And you might have some sort of system where person X is the owner of a share of the productivity of robots A, B, and C, and that could be a variable share depending on what those robots actually do. Or you could have a sort of pool and everybody gets an equal share from that combined pool. So you could design it that way, but then there is also the question of how do you allocate the proceeds? How do you make sure it's fair? And how do you avoid the tragedy of the commons where everything is in the same pool? There's a diminished incentive to take care of it and make sure it's optimized. It's like if you have a common facility that everyone ostensibly has a responsibility to maintain, but nobody really does. If you've ever been in a situation in a workplace where you have, say, a common break room that people have to clean, and many people choose to skimp on their duties to clean it, that seems to be the pitfall of any sort of common pool of resources that is then allocated to people. So interesting ideas. And yes, go ahead.
So one of the possibilities of what I proposed in that policy is the ability to not just vote for the labor rates as a very small pebble in a big pool, to affect a labor rate with your vote on what you say you want robots to do or not do or what have you. If you're also able to say, I'm voting for the usage of my share of the representative robotic labor force, meaning, so the policy being every citizen has the right to one equal share of the automated labor force, meaning an equal vote and fair share. The ownership of that means that you can attribute that to your own startup, for example. So rather than trying to compete with all of those, mechanized hands with your watery flesh sack, that's a very difficult thing to do. It's not to say that you're not capable of doing what humans have been able to do thus far, but it's not like you're not in a mech, pick up this building, put it over here or something. So if you're able to attribute your share of the automated labor force to function on your behalf in a business, that's something that I think is a establishment of a continued middle class rather than a haves and have-nots with the ability to mass distribute viruses in a programmable manner and such, as our future is now understood at this time. So rather than having that type of a dynamic in who's doing what in the world, if we can continue to have a middle class and functional economy through the enablement of the means of production being distributed rather than being centralized, that I think is a key to being able to have the checks and balances of the freedoms that individual rights and the United States Constitution have been able to provide, and the successes that have come from that, and the evolution of people whom are not owned in their own minds or function, but whom are free and creative, and a renaissance of the way Americans are, as opposed to the way a slave mentality or scarcity as opposed to creativity or abundance. Those types of, rather than functioning based in a reactionary way, if you're able to be self-motivated, right? That's the difference between whether a computer, be it sentient, be it able to process and communicate, is it self-motivated or is it reactionary? So the ability to not keep humanity in a reactionary state, meaning, well, I'm motivated because I'm hungry. Instead, it's I'm motivated because I like this and want to do this thing.
Yes.
Now we're stepping into another, realm of value of a person. And rather than de-evolving humanity, I think we should continue that direction and be able to use more than our own hands if we're able to do so.
Yes. And our friend Luis Arroyo writes that incentives beyond monetary ones would be an interesting discussion, and indeed how to motivate people without giving them immediate monetary rewards is an important consideration. I would agree that a person essentially has to be middle class or better off in order for those motives to be effective, because a person who is at least somewhat materially comfortable has the time and the breathing room to think about, well, what do they enjoy doing? What do they want to contribute to the world? How do they want to transform the world? If people struggle day to day, they're not going to have that leisure to really focus on that. They're going to be focusing on where's their next meal going to come from, how to make sure they have housing, etc. So enabling more people to be or remain middle class is part of that solution. Mike Lazine has an interesting idea, and then we'll go to Jason Geringer, but I wanted to highlight this comment. Mike writes, how about rewarding some form of NFTs if certain jobs are gamified, just like when you play a video game and you win a power-up or coins, and he describes it as Super Mario-fying your job. So that's quite a creative idea. Jason, please go ahead. Jason Geringer.
There's one thing that I think that it will have to take just the most advanced AI before they will take up this from us, and that's just our ability to like stuff, our ability to be a fan. Art. I mean, if an AI is trying to make art, it can have a generative adversarial network, a GAN, and go through this process and get a little better. But really, a human is best at knowing what's cool, what they like, what's, not cool, what. And so I think for a long time, we're going to always have that role. And I would guess that even if we had advanced digital proxies, then the digital proxy would be asking us, hey, is this cool? Do you like this? And maybe over time they will learn and have their own likes. But even after, I still, people are always going to want to have fans. I mean, and that vote of, hey, I like this is good, or no, it's not, is always going to be something. And
I'd like to add something to that. It's you can't can you automate your customers? I mean, are you going to have digital proxies who are customers? I mean, are your digital proxies going to make income so that then you have companies trying to gain their business? So unless you're going to a company, I mean, they're probably going to try and get the haves, if they fully automate, but eventually there's going to be a threshold where you're not going to have customers. So how are you going to stay in business? So that's kind of what I see. I mean, Henry Ford, increased the pay of his workers so that they could buy his product. So if you have no one to buy your product, how do you stay in business?
So yeah. Art Ramon, do you think that businesses of the future are going to be incentivized to make sure that they have customers with fairly high incomes, at least enough to afford their products? And if so, how would they do that, especially if they don't have laborers? Like, let's say there's an entirely new startup and it's based entirely on automated labor. So there could be one owner and he invests, say, $500,000 into some robots who are productive enough to give him an income, and he gradually grows his force of robots who produce things for his customers. Then how is he going to motivate people or motivate enough societal change that there would be enough of a base of customers for him going forward?
The analogy I would bring would be sort of like a individual programmer who creates an app like Flappy Bird, and just one person made an app and he made a ton of money. So he was able to grab customers, but yet they were still all human. So somehow not all business will be able to do that because they're going to require a lot of raw resources to create a product. So yeah, the only analogy I can see is Flappy Bird, the Flappy Bird creator, or anyone similar to that, where it's kind of like a one-man show who's able to leverage very cheap infrastructure and just make a ton of money. But again, the end consumer is still a human, unless somehow digital proxies become profitable and they on their own decide to buy other products from other companies somehow. I don't know how that would work, but that's what I think of.
Yeah, having the means of production is basically what we're getting at. Having with the ability to, for example, if you can live a self-reliant life outside of financial economy because you have a ranch where you can produce your own food, you can produce a product, and with or without money, you're able to produce a value into the world. Now add money. The number of self-reliant people that existed, even if they were functioning in a form of scarcity, producing their own food, when we had, about half of the world was working on a ranch feeding themselves. The tractor comes along, and now how many of those people are living in an apartment and cannot feed themselves, right? So that balance between being able to be self-reliant versus not, that number has changed. We've gone down in the number of self-reliant people, and instead of having all kinds of private farms, we have oligarchs with massive amounts of food production. As it's been noted of late that Bill Gates has acquired lots of food production, and I think that's good. I'd much rather have someone domestically owning that than foreign influence. But to have someone have a valve to be able to say who eats and who doesn't is not a more advanced form of humanity than being able to feed yourself and have choice and freedom and liberty and things. So I believe freedom begins at self-reliance, and there's only so much productive land and such to be able to sustain a population. And as longevists, I think that's something we ought to consider. It's not the Highlander. It's not, there can only be one. There can be a large civilized society, that we can do that. But as far as not overpopulating, not making it so that we're reliant on not being self-reliant in order to be alive, those types of things, it's hard to explain to people that live in cities, which is the majority of people, that you are making, or you as a people are making it so it's hard to be able to sustain the number of people, because self-reliance is cannibalizing others as opposed to producing for yourself and growing something. It's an inflection point in politics, and it's an inflection point in philosophy and ignorance or reality in what it takes to keep a life alive. I think there's a cool analogy of, do you guys know what sea monkeys are?
Yes.
Yeah, so you could feed the sea monkeys, are little like shrimp looking things.
They're very short-lived, unfortunately.
Well, if we could feed them both food and money and see what kind of an economy sea monkeys make, I think that would be an interesting ant colony there.
Yes.
Well,
So
it's interesting about the money, because if we go through an economic singularity and like the cost of labor goes way down and the cost of electricity goes way down, paying somebody money isn't like the same thing as it is today. So I almost think we should include in the UBI something to help the people to be self-sustainable and give them means of production, because giving them money, it might not, they got to be able to spend it, and if they can't spend it, then you're giving them something that's worthless.
right. So that's the concept of universal basic means of production from our friend Corey Kowal. And I wanted to highlight this comment from T42 Press. And this is a reference to what Jason Mallory is describing. And he is describing real life robots to replace workers rather than proxy robots. And that's correct. So the incremental benefits to productivity, sometimes the massive benefits to productivity, come from physical robots that can do certain jobs better than human beings, or programs that can do certain intellectual jobs better than human beings or more efficiently than human beings. And the digital proxies are more intended to aid consumers, or perhaps aid individual workers. Like if there's a digital proxy of me that I can outsource some of my day-to-day tasks to, and those tasks are sufficiently repetitive that this digital proxy can be pre-programmed to perform them, perhaps with some variation, some responsiveness to external conditions, then I could see how that could be used in production. But largely, I think the physical robots are going to have the most significant impact on productivity. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think if you look at the traditional balance between a husband and wife, for example, if you're there through scarcity, if you're there through needing each other through codependence, versus wanting to be there, that ability to educate into society how to have those symbiotic things, rather than having what's being pushed further into a codependence through scarcity that is also going in the direction of a consolidation. So it's not husband and wife is not a good example for that at this point, but or analogy or whatever. But yeah, the ability to have not just interactions with others based on scarcity dependence, but the ability to to jam with musicians you want to, as opposed to this is where I get paid to play music. And you dance with different people differently, so how that kind of translates with what makes someone you really want to dance with, and that experience, as opposed to being projected or something like that, or being something that is not the integrity or authentic self or authentic experience. I don't see that as an improvement, and I think that I think the arts is a great litmus test for what values of human motivation are, and a lot of artists are not the greatest role models, but they're also harboring what I think is going to be the foundational perspective of a more advanced human race. Through being able to have motivations that are not based in scarcity, that are based in the things that we like, and being able to have that kind of view, like being an optimist, not a pessimist.
Right.
But for things that are equivalent to an economy.
Yes. So, of course, one of the distinguishing features of an artist is the ability to envision something and then depict it. But really, the ability to envision it, the conceptual combination of elements, is really the mark of an artist. The technique, I think, is secondary. And this is where we get into, for instance, AI assisted or AI enabled art generation through programs like DALL-E 2, Midjourney, Dreamlike Art, and Disco Diffusion. There are various others as well. And those programs can generate images very quickly, sometimes in unexpected ways, but it is still the responsibility of a human being to enter a prompt, to have a sufficiently creative prompt, and then to select among the options that the AI generates and maybe create variations or tweak certain elements before saying, this is an artwork, this is some sort of concept that I want to present to the world, the instantiation of that concept, because the AI can have interesting outputs, or it can have outputs that seem random or jumbled or incoherent. And it's still the job of a human being to have that discernment and determine whether the AI successfully realized that person's creative vision. So this is an aside because this is a flourishing field right now. Many people are experimenting with these AI art generation systems. Also, I wanted to thank our friend John H., who writes, "Speaking of money, we appreciate your generous contribution, John." And
Woo-hoo! Shout out to John H.
I think he also makes a good point here. He writes, much of what is being discussed here seems to presume that humanity won't eventually transcend the need, if not the desire, to work for a living. And he sees that as going extinct. I actually agree with that. I think a lot of people today attribute meaning to their lives based on what they call their career, which is the set of tasks they consistently perform for a living that is integrated within some sort of system that takes a while to learn and to master and to advance within, but eventually can be quite rewarding. This has not always been the case throughout human history. There were many eras of human history, say before the specialization of our time, when most people were small independent landholders, or they lived in villages where pretty much everyone did a little bit of everything. You might have had like a blacksmith, you might have had a few guards whose primary purpose was to provide security, but most people farmed their own plots of land, for instance, and did things around the house, and the economy of those settlements was based around the household rather than on an extensive specialization of labor. And that was a less advanced economic stage. I'm not suggesting returning to that. It's just people had different conceptions of themselves, different sources of meaning during that kind of era. So in an era of more widespread automation, when people might not have to work in order to sustain themselves or sustain a certain standard of living, they will have to find other sources of meaning. And this idea of creativity or creative self-actualization is very important as a source of that meaning. Luis Arroyo cites Captain Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek, and the citation is to Picard's comment, "The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity." So a sense of meaning that's outside of a career or even the acquisition of material resources. Definitely an important subject to consider. Now,
maybe we should go gamble on the holodeck.
Well, if it doesn't have
Wait.
material consequences to our lives, then it becomes like a very detailed computer game, a fully immersive computer game. The problem with gambling is not the mechanism of the slot machine or any particular game. The problem with gambling is the expected value of each game is negative. The house always wins in the long term. And the game is designed to drain people of real material resources. So if that doesn't happen, then it just becomes another type of computer game.
That's an interesting question, though. Would you say that that's still ethical? I mean, like, if you had this system that is actually good for the person to be involved in it, not like gambling, but you are actually using techniques that get them addicted to it, is that wrong?
I've been writing about that for quite some time in terms of the use of gamification to motivate positive behaviors such as learning or acquiring credentials, passing exams, or becoming more proficient in a field. I think we should gamify as much of knowledge acquisition as possible so that instead of being addicted to behaviors or substances that are bad for them, people become addicted to pursuits that are good for them and are uplifting for the rest of humanity. So I think that is ethical, to realign human motivations with objectively beneficial outcomes. Now, Jason, I wanted to ask you to comment on your startup idea, On Call Labs, so that we can have a bit of a discussion on that as well.
Yeah, I'll jump right into that as opposed and digress from the direction of fiat currency and its ability to construct what we want to survive in society, but sometimes at the expense of bad motives. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so what I'm doing is good motives. It's for health. It's for the access to health, and it's called On Call Labs. I purchased commercial plots off of Interstate 80 in Nevada, and have run into some major hurdles since COVID, and thefts and the abilities to functionally move forward have been slowed. I'll just put it that way. But I've got ground floor. I've also got a provisional patent filing for the utility and business method for converting a shipping container into mobile hospital or lab space, thus being able to utilize international shipping routes that are already standardized. So for example, you'd be able to put like the Da Vinci robotic surgeon into a 20-foot shipping container, which could then be delivered to a person's house, be them in a city or rural or wherever. And you can have a surgery at your home, as opposed to having, sick and injured people all having to congregate and co-infect each other and things of that nature. So what I'm suggesting is, trying to functionally produce, is a distributed hospital network where hospitals that exist now would be able to access, modern tools. For example, like we're able to 3D print kidneys. We've been able to do that for like 15 years. There's a TED Talk over a decade ago about it. And almost every election, there's something about dialysis in California. And like 90% of dialysis goes to 2 companies. So instead of having situations like that, where people are not having their kidney replaced, instead going on dialysis 3 days a week, and we're farming the sick rather than curing our people. And the definition of what a doctor is in function, regardless of any pay grade. I think that being able to have a hospital that can't afford this $250,000 3D printer, for example, because a year from then, it's obsolete compared to the next one. Now this one has scaffolding, so you could build things differently. So if you're going to implement something and train people on it and all that, and then a year later, it's not modern healthcare anymore, we're running into a lot of those assimilation issues of modern tools. So if you could put something in a container that can then be moved from hospital to hospital, we're able to advance the tools faster. We're able to have a higher technology growth rate when it comes to health and the implementation of healthcare. So that's, I think, one of the effects of this type of system. And it's something that we could also, as individuals, have So, for example, if someone was able to invest $50,000, they can have access for the duration of the existence of this metal cube, the ability to have access to their own hospital space. So you don't have to go to the hospital and be subject to gold standard procedures. Rather, you can hire your own doctor and find your procedures better. So what I'm suggesting is, and Jason Garinger, maybe you could help with this. It's a website with two databases, one of which healthcare professionals whom can be hired, kind of like a LinkedIn for freelance or for website developers or something like that, but for healthcare professionals. So you can find a doctor and hire them. The other database would be for the doctor's viewing, which would be of medical devices that they'd be able to rent for the usage of that procedure. So On-Call Labs is not actually using medical devices or even owning them. It's just facilitating the rent of them, kind of like what eBay does with all the products that are sold on eBay, but eBay is not actually selling a product other than the platform of a marketplace. Mm-hmm. So On-Call Labs is a platform for healthcare that enables the usage or the hiring of a doctor who could use tools, and then On-Call Labs can deliver that so that you can have your procedure or what have you, rather than being subject to systems that are frankly farming the sick, and $1 out of $5 in America is going towards. I spent 5 years dealing with nerve pains in my legs, and I could not sit down like this for 5 years, while Kaiser hospitals just wanted me on narcotics.
That's a tragedy that a lot of the medical procedures focus on essentially maintaining patients in a particular state of dependency instead of curing them of their conditions.
Yeah, so rather than having a system like that, I went to a different doctor who has a patent on disc seal technology and the procedure of it, which is a fibrin injection into spinal discs. And 2 out of 3 Americans have low back pain before old age. And it's because we sit down a lot now. We're not made to sit down like that. And it pinches the bottom disc. Then you get stenosis, sciatica, those types of things. I made an accordion out of my spine on a motorcycle and popped discs. It doesn't matter how young your blood is. If the tire is popped, it's popped. You got to patch it for it to hold air. Same with your spinal discs. If it's dark in the MRI because it's leaked fluid out, it's popped. And fibrin, which is one cellular step away from collagen, which is what your disc walls, the annular walls, are made out of, that can patch those tears. And it was far less invasive, far less healing time. It was actually curative rather than the surgeries that existed via the second largest employer in the state of California, Kaiser Hospitals. And I'm attempting to get this kind of procedure in there. And I think a lot of the pushback is just, it's similar to a surgeon not wanting to lose his job to a robot, but it's more, it's not like they're losing their job to a robot. It's that they're actually just needing to have the curative outcomes of a doctor's actions in our society. Thus not having narcotic sales, not having long-term income from the farming of the sick while a person's in a torturous state of nerve pain. So after doing these fibrin injections, I've been able to get back to a functional life, and I'm a functional, productive person in society again, or the enablement to be. So as we're looking at how large institutions are slow to take on these types of things, being able to have a much smaller, leaner, or just personal choice, like the right to try laws, where it's essentially states' rights and individual rights in regards to the healthcare that you'd like to be able to do. If we're able to do that through people being able to have access to what's suitable for an operation to be conducted in it, then that's you take your healthcare into your own hands, and I think the longevity community is doing that. So what On-Call Labs could do is be the platform for the ability to have networked medical professionals. I have back pain. Here are people that work on spines. The ability to maybe see what kind of procedures they do, what kind of outcomes, and have like a baseball card that you could flip over and see what's the batting average of this guy. That kind of stuff for what procedures are actually happening. The ability to have facilitate health rather than profit. So doctors would be able to set their own rates. People that produce medical devices would be able to set the rates for like a rental rate there, and the ability to put that together and have a curative procedure where you don't have to step into the world of you being the commodity now. That's something I've experienced, and I didn't feel as though it was respecting individual rights or not creating a torturous system for profit. I didn't think it was an American thing to do at all. So yeah, I think On-Call Labs is a much better platform. So it's something that could be scaled quickly. I've got a couple different designs and contacted existing places that can produce very similar to what I'm looking to produce for about $30,000 as a not structure, a vehicle trailer that this would be on. I've also messed with designs, had a guy run off with some money. He was not a union welder, but he ran off my money and parts. And the police didn't want to enforce a penal code against him. There's other victims of this guy. But essentially the ability to use mobile home parts, which are standardized, tongue and axles and rollway wheels. Those standardized parts on I-beams, which are all engineered, you know what that is made out of. So it's kind of like, even if we were hit with, you're Henry Ford now and we have auto regulation, we'd be able to eventually get through that, I believe, because it's all already standardized parts for mobile homes, which are, you'd be able to source those anywhere in the country and have distributed production. So the ability to scale a hospital network via On-Call Labs could be performed. So the ability to take on money and have it be put to use can be done at a small scale, where we produce one of these things and put it on the commercial parcel off of 80 in Nevada, and just put a TV and a camera in it, so you could have Health Point Plus or some other type of video conference with the doctor. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that's the smallest scale step that we could make a functional prototype to begin with. But it could also be something where we're creating 10,000 of these in the next 2 months. Should we, contact union welders and produce this? Here's already sourceable parts for distributed production. So the ability to scale this kind of a network can happen really quickly, as well as the fact that most ports have, like Connex West, for example, makes shipping container conversions. They'll build one out as a tiny house or something like that, or like mobile office. And for something comparable, although some parts would need to be different, but like epoxied floor, spraying food grade epoxy on all the walls, everything in there is an edible surface according to the FDA. Then that would be something that could be produced for roughly 30,000 a pop. Although the distributed production with mobile home parts could be much less, but we'd need to source materials and scale in that way. So the ability to take on investment and put it to use is something that it can get off the ground for 50 grand. It could also take 50 million and say, we're Kaiser now. And that could be, a year or two later. So it's a spark kind of a thing.
Very interesting. So we have a few observations from our viewers. Daniel Tweet writes, the on-call labs model would work well for maker spaces also because essentially the model is the patients have certain procedures that they would like to be performed or certain devices that they would like to have access to. And then on the other side, there would be medical providers or device providers who would list them at certain prices that would be transparent. And then the patients could decide, all right, I want this service delivered to me or made accessible to me in some way. And there could even be individualized arrangements with the providers of those services. So some might say, I have an MRI machine at this facility, you can use it for this price. Others might say, well, I will take the MRI machine to you. That might cost a little more to get it transported, but you have that option. And Jason Geringer wonders, what should we do about the crazy hospital prices? Would on-call labs have to charge the insurance price? My understanding is this would be completely outside of any sort of insurance system because price transparency would exist up front. So with insurance agreements, health insurance agreements, often the price is not disclosed to the customer up front. There is a list price that a hospital or other medical provider charges, and then there could be a discount off of that price for a particular insurance arrangement, and then what the insurance contract covers or doesn't cover, or how much of a deductible or co-insurance there is, depends on the individual arrangement between the patient or member and the insurance company. In this case, though, there would be the ability of a provider to say, well, we don't take insurance, we don't deal with that step within the process, but we have this upfront price. You can choose to pay that upfront price and get the service or access to the device.
So through any form of healthcare in Kaiser hospitals or any established, without a single payer thing or without any like my ability to spend money from an insurance on my own behalf, from Medicare, Medi-Cal, and the vast majority of like Kaiser membership or healthcare insurance, I was not able to get a curative procedure. I was only able to get on a hamster wheel of drugs and additional vertebral fusions that don't address structural integrity of the spinal disc at all. So I spent 25 grand out of pocket, got fibrin in lumbar and cervical, and am a functional human being that's out of a torturous state. And I have a life to look forward to living rather than one that wasn't worth living outside of honor and sacrifice. Joy, the ability to have that was not coming from the health insurance system. It did occur through access of land equity and the ability to pay out of pocket for a curative procedure. So while we want to think that having two systems that can go like this, with people becoming more and more desperate in health situations, I don't see that as a curative situation, as opposed to here's what your free market doctors, here are the people that do these types of things, you can talk to doctors, send a note, hey, this is my situation, or what have you. Also, you end up with insurance where so you end up with systems with insurance where you're not able to do a procedure unless you have to do that procedure. So you end up with these click-clack functionalities. So rather than in a timely manner, so you could take like the ultrasound thing. This is you can buy one retail for $1,000. You can get one on Alibaba or something, maybe a few $100s or something. And an ultrasound that can go to your phone now, and you can look at the baby inside the belly. You could also put it on your knee and move your knee around, and a computer program can put together, in a frame rate, so that when you move the joint, you can see how things are actually moving rather than a static image. So this is something that can be done live on camera with a doctor on a screen in a Zoom meeting. You can hold this thing in your hand, and here's what the inside of it looks like. You know what I mean? and build the image based on an ultrasound. Does that mean you have the MRI that has these boxes checked so you can now do this procedure via paperwork? No, it means a doctor is able to do his job and all of the red tape's out of the way.
It's interesting because in many respects that does empower patients to seek out the treatments that they think would be most effective and find providers who are willing to furnish those treatments without going through a predetermined sequence. You're correct that there are some insurance programs that require pre-authorization for certain kinds of procedures, particularly more advanced or more expensive medical procedures. And they also require patients to go through a certain sequence of tests or other procedures before accessing what the patient actually wants and what might actually solve the problem. So that could introduce needless delays that might prevent a speedy resolution to a health issue until the health issue becomes much worse in magnitude. So giving the patient the choice is very important. And if a patient wants to try a particular approach right away, the patient should be empowered to do that. Jason Geringer suggests you could add 4 rotors like a drone and make giant drones, and then the lab could fly to its destination.
They're 5,000 pounds for a 20-foot shipping container.
And then John H. writes, that's actually not a bad idea. He has heard of people's lives being saved because medical devices have been droned to them. So if it can be done, I think the drones still have to be fairly lightweight, and whatever they carry these days at least would have to be fairly lightweight, but certain kinds of devices or components would be sufficiently small that I think a drone could transport them.
Life flight for something really immediate.
It would have to be a big drone, like a crane drone, you know?
So
I think that the point of timely care, though, is a big deal. I was, let's just say, I was poisoned in some way, not really sure what it was. I lost consciousness mid-sentence and came to very similar to an anesthesia while talking to some people in Davis, California. And I went to Kaiser and Davis after communicating on the internet. I requested 3 times for a blood test, what's in me, as whatever's in me is going out of my body and won't be on a test maybe. So I had to talk to a specific doctor that needs to be referred by my primary care. I have to come into the primary care, and then I asked my primary care physician, who's no longer my primary care physician. I asked twice in person after coming in so as to be able to jump through these hoops to get some lab work done. And she said, no, you had a blood test last May.
And that was an urgent situation. So the issue was your life was in danger and you needed information quickly about your condition so as to be able to avert it. And you still had to go through those hoops, through those processes that are quite time consuming. And there are ways around that right now. So there are facilities that will do blood tests for cash, again, bypassing the insurance system. And they publish their menu of prices. For some people, that could be a significant out-of-pocket expenditure. But on the other hand, if you want to know right away, you will have a better chance of getting that information quickly.
Yeah, so I was not able to pay out of pocket if I've already had it according to my insurance. It was, you just don't, then go somewhere else. And this is now days later. So whatever's in my system might be out of it now. I contacted once for a stool sample and was blanket denied as an individual, as not having gone to school for 10 years or so, PhD, ordering that.
Interesting.
According to their policy. So the structure that's come down is, it's not healthy.
So yes, there are plenty of obstacles of the sort you described. Now we do have 10 minutes remaining in our salon, and I wanted to make sure we address some of the other subjects that we wanted to discuss. So T42 Press asks, why is medical ahead of politics to you? Well, we are seeking to enact political and policy reforms to make it easier for people to access life-saving medical care and life-extending medical care. So we want to make it easier for research to occur that could cure the degenerative diseases of aging and reverse our biological aging. So the point of politics is to improve people's lives and to
that issue is the one that every single one of our members all agrees with.
Yeah,
you know, everybody likes.
And I think T42 Press may be a bit new to the transhumanist community, so this is a good opportunity to clarify the focus of our political activism. But it's also broader on technological progress, on the convergence of emerging technologies that stand to improve human well-being in a multitude of respects. And so we bring in concepts like automation or these creative startup models that Jason Mallory has described. But Jason also ran as an independent candidate, and I wanted to get your thoughts on how you think independent candidates, or perhaps candidates from minor political parties, can positively affect the trajectory of freedom in America. So I think we all agree freedom has been on the decline. There have been certain influences contributing to that. So what can reverse that trajectory? I think technology is part of it, but good policy and rational discussions of policy are another part of it.
Yeah, I think recently Tulsi Gabbard went away from party politics into being an independent as an iconic figurehead and former presidential candidate who's in the media and from the Air Force and from formerly the Democratic Party. So I think when you have figure of speech inflection points like that, where it's not that party or that party, it's the ability to have rational conversation and legitimate leadership.
Yes.
A representative government versus a supplanting or subversion of such via other forms of control. So I think how you can do that, put yourself on ballots, make content, ask if anyone has a better idea. What is the actual issue? It's amazing to me that so the 2-year term of a U.S. House of Representatives congressional person, a congressperson, is supposed to be there for 2 years, and the entire job is to create a law. And what percentage of congressional candidates are saying this is what I'm bringing forward as a bill to turn into a law? And that's like a single digit maybe. So if that's not, if we're not, asking the right questions in the hiring process for the job, that's what I think independent candidates can start, even if we're not individually successful at doing so, we're able to bring the conversation to that. And I believe that that's one of the fears of people like Zoe Lofgren, who's not yet been able to reply to me. If you can no longer have a conversation about something, then you don't have to address those things. So if we're, what's the best policy here? What, regardless of individual, what content are we bringing forward so that, as an individual candidate, it's not just like being the most loud person or something.
Right. Yes. So the focus of politics should be on policy, not on individual glorification or individual ambition. We have an interesting exchange here in the chat. Luis Arroyo writes, politics decides all after all. And John H. responds, which is why the ambitious always try to dominate the political process. And this is a problem. This is certainly a problem within the major two political parties, that really the point of a lot of these politicians' activity is to gain a particular political office and stay in office. And the way they stay in office is not through being principled, not through trying to improve the lives of their constituents, but through essentially employing an array of tactics designed to divide and rule, to make it easier for them to essentially have their reliable constituency that has been segmented either through gerrymandering or through propaganda to always support them. And on the other side, distinguish themselves from their opponents from the other major political party, but neither of the major political parties really want significant reform, because that would threaten this kind of symbiotic duopoly that they have, where they each really need the other to be the other, to kind of polarize people against.
Yeah, you've heard major Democrats actually say that too. We need a functional Republican Party, you know, and that's why, because between them they got the whole ball game. And yeah,
what's being created is non-competitive elections. The entrenchment of conquering elections is not a more perfect union or the definition of a representative or legitimate government in the United States in the first place. Routes to be able to, the pushback to what's occurred to elections no longer being competitive in many elections are things like ranked choice voting, or other ways of being able to have actual competition. What I've suggested is soapboxtalks.com. What I've suggested is basically, rather than tearing our leadership apart for the future, if we, on a digital county voter guide, which is what soapboxtalks.com is, digital county voter guide, where in an election you could have all the different candidates and a 10-minute talk, who, what, why, where, how, when. And that's what a candidate can bring. It's a 10-minute like TED Talk kind of format, and the TED Talk will not have a candidate. Here's where that could happen. Soapboxtalks.com. So if you're able to, as a voter, see your choices and hear directly what they're trying to do, and make your educated decision without all of the removal of respect for leadership, or infiltration of foreign motives, or, you know, Russian bots, as opposed to like actual educated voter, I think it would make a much better democracy. So I built this soapbox. I made Sacramento Soapbox, and I pulled it when going to get those fiber injections in Texas from Dr. Pauza. I stopped at Nevada, Utah, Colorado was shut down, Wyoming, it was the weekend. But then Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and every single Secretary of State, I put the Hyperloop coast to coast, which is a vacuum tube Hyperloop, not electromagnetic, not those speeds, vacuum tube, like the Fluke. So I put the Hyperloop as well as soapboxtalks.com for a digital county voter guide. I put those just single page letter, official correspondence, stamp, date, time received by the state of Arizona. Here is your copy and your receipt. And I got that from every single Secretary of State. And then I came back to California and I went to Secretary of State of California, who's a Black woman from Arkansas now, unelected, and was unable to get a receipt.
Yes. So we do need to conclude in about a minute. So thank you, Jason, for describing the idea of Soapbox Talks. I also wanted, in the minute we have left, to highlight a ranked choice voting initiative that is going to be and is on the ballot in Nevada this general election. Nevada Question 3, the top 5 ranked choice voting initiative, which creates an open primary system where anyone can vote in the primary, anyone can run in the primary. The top 5 vote getters for any given office advance to the general election, which is then decided upon by a ranked choice voting mechanism. I think this is the most forward-thinking ballot initiative in Nevada history that I have seen. So I would encourage anyone in Nevada to vote yes on question 3. And now we have run out of time for our virtual Enlightenment Salon. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. We appreciate the conversation, and live long and prosper.